Chair, Cheshire CCG, and welcome to the Cheshire East Place Committee of the CCG. And I am delighted to be introducing and starting off this slightly unusual CCG committee. Unusual in that it's a CCG committee with a number of partners around the table in a decision-making capacity. The committee itself is a committee of the governing body, and the governing body has delegated responsibility for decision-making to this committee for matters relating to Cheshire East. So it is a decision-making body, and it has on it a number of partners from local authority and from providers. We will come on to declarations of interest, but of course doing that does raise a number of issues of conflicts of interest, none which are greater than those CCGs have always had, in that we've always had GPs around the table who have always been conflicted in their role as providers anyway. So these are things that we are used to dealing with. The meeting is a meeting being held in public rather than a public meeting, and so whilst we invite questions from the public in advance, we don't ordinarily enter into debate with members of the public during the meeting. But you are invited to submit questions if you wish during the meeting, which we will endeavour to answer outside of the meeting. Right, if we can start just with some apologies. So we do have apologies and some people sending deputies. So Christine Morris has sent apologies, but Dr. Dan Howcroft is here on her behalf. Rachel Hall has sent apologies, one of our GP colleagues. John Wilbraham from East Cheshire Trust has sent apologies, but Julie Green is kindly deputising for him. James Sumner from Mid Cheshire Trust has also sent apologies, but Caroline Keating is kindly deputising for him. And we also have apologies from William Greenwood and from Paddy Cairns, both of whom I believe are at the launch of our Cheshire East GP Confederation, which is itself a very exciting and important development. So we're wishing them all well for that launch. Christine, are there any other apologies? I will take silence as a no.
No, Andy, those were all of the apologies.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to suggest that we go around and introduce ourselves, but if people would introduce themselves as they speak, and if people forget to do that, I might jump in and just remind you, if that's okay. That does take us on to item 1.2, which is the declarations of interest. CCG members have their declarations of interest published on the CCG website. Colleagues that are joining us have been submitting their conflict of interest to us. I think we have the majority of them, which will then be published. I think, to be fair to say, it's fair to say that these are all declarations that people have already made within their own organisations. But I am going to ask in a minute if anybody wishes to declare anything on those declarations, which is particularly pertinent to the agenda we have before us today. In saying that, I will give a couple of generic declarations of interest. One being that we've asked partners to come and join us and help in the decision making of the CCG, which we've already said there are some inherent conflicts in that based on the organisations, other roles that people have, and that's almost a positive thing. We'll have to work through the conflicts of interest, but it's a positive reason to have people around the table to do that. And I said it's not very different from the GPs, all of whom are conflicted. And actually there is an item which I would declare on behalf of all GP colleagues later, which is about the extended access, which involves GP income. So myself and GP colleagues are conflicted on that item. I have two people with hands up, so Councillor Corcoran.
Thank you. Firstly, to declare the interest on item 4.2 as leader of Cheshire East Council on the SEND strategy. I don't consider that to be prejudicial. However, item 4.3, I'd like to declare that my wife is a local GP, and that's the extended access options paper.
Thank you very much, Sam. And Councillor Rhodes.
I'm just making a general declaration that I'm a Cheshire East councillor, and at times there will be a conflict of interest. But obviously, I'm as a member of the CCG board. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think we have to acknowledge those conflicts. This is part of what we need to be able to learn to work through with our ambition to work together more closely in the future. For the section on GP extended access, clearly I'm not in a position to chair that. I would ordinarily hand over to Councillor Corcoran, but as he's also just declared an interest on that item, we have arranged that Peter Monday will chair that item, and so it will be for Peter to decide how he wishes to deal with us, those of us that are conflicted during that, whether he wishes to exclude us from the meeting, allow us to be part of the debate, or etc. But that will be Peter's decision. For later, the other items that have been declared, I don't consider to be material. I think people can take part in the debate. We just need to be aware of those. So thank you for colleagues for making those. That takes us then to item 2.1, which is the patient story. We do traditionally have a patient story. This occasion, it is in the form of a video. So I'm hoping the technology will work and we can play a video.
I'm Dr. Rebecca Banks, GP and Urgent Care Lead for Cheshire CCG. Over the next few minutes, we'd like to describe to you how we're going to be working differently across health and social care to ensure our patients get the right care in the right place, and how we support patients and their families both during and following an acute illness or injury. We'd like to describe the steps we are going to take to ensure we respond rapidly to people's health and care needs, offering choices and an appropriate level of treatment and support. Our ambition is to aim for a timely hospital discharge when people are stable, and we would like to show you how this will be undertaken in a way in which patients and their families are safe and well supported. I'm sure you'll agree this last year has been very difficult for all of us, and our health and care services have had to adopt new and innovative ways of working. However, out of this challenge have come new and exciting approaches to meeting patient needs, and this has been well received by both patients using the service and people working within it. This initiative is called Home First, and this is what we'd like to share with you now.
Doris was admitted to hospital with worsening confusion in May 2020. Prior to admission, she'd been living with her daughter-in-law and had no package of care, although was nursed in bed and had significant care needs. Doris had a background of cognitive impairment due to vascular dementia and had been deemed to lack capacity in relation to discharge plans. Initially, Doris's daughter-in-law was reluctant for Doris to be discharged, with carers coming into the house, expressing her concern was related to the risk of the carers being infected with COVID-19. However, following discussions, she did agree to a 4 times a day double-handled package of care with the rapid response team.
My name's Katrina Oliver. I'm the manager of the Integrated Discharge team here at Macclesfield District General Hospital. This year has been a particularly challenging year for everybody, but especially for our patients in hospital, as during their stay they haven't been able to receive visitors, and especially in their hour of need when they're at their most vulnerable. Adopting the discharge to assess approach early last year reinforced the Home First approach and has had a positive impact on our patients. The discharge to assess pathway model is based on 4 clear pathways on discharge. Pathway 0 relates to simple discharges requiring no formal input from either health or social care. Pathway 1 is to support people at home whilst they recover, enabling them to return home with either a package of care or reablement. Pathway 2 is for people requiring a period of rehabilitation following their stay in hospital and is usually in a bedded setting. And pathway 3 is for people requiring ongoing support, often in a nursing home, and are likely to need this long term. Having adopted this approach and working closely with health and social care colleagues has enabled us to care for our patients in the right place at the right time, with the emphasis on supporting people on discharge to maximise their independence, build up their confidence and hopefully get them straight back home.
Home First model provides a number of positive outcomes and benefits for service users, focusing on integrated, timely, personalised care which maximises independence, ensuring the service user is receiving the right care at the right time in the right place.
Thank you very much for for that. I'll open it up for comments in a second, but for me that illustrated two, I think, very important things. One is the reason for us being around this table together, and that required health and social care interaction. And it's not all about health and social care, it's much wider than that, but that's important. And the second is how that service was being delivered in a person-centred way, where the people involved in the service understood what it was that was needed. They were learning from the person they were providing the service to in order to provide the service better, understanding those contexts and aims. And I think there's two really important points for me: the coordination, so the reason why we're around the table together, and having a person-centred approach, I think, are two really important things. I will open up to any other comments and around that. Louise.
Hi. Obviously, I'm not normally around the patient stories that you have at these meetings, and this being a new meeting, would that be typical, Andrew, of a patient story? From my perspective, I think that was a service story in which a patient had their name dropped in. I don't, as Health Watch, I don't see that as a patient story. I haven't heard their perspective. I haven't heard how it worked for them. Haven't heard some of the challenges, and hopefully how those challenges have been overcome, because obviously that would be the ultimate. So I'm just not sure if I'm misunderstanding the purpose of what you've referred to as a patient story here today.
I don't think you are, Louise. So no, our patient stories at their best are patient stories, and we've had some really quite complex and difficult problems that people have brought and shared with us. I think we have struggled more since COVID, and your help in getting patient stories, which are more patient stories, would be very much appreciated. So the ambition is for them to be patient stories, and I would accept your point of view that was more a story about a service improvement that had some patient feedback in it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we will bear in mind that perspective, hopefully, as we go through the rest of the meeting. So that takes us then to 2.2, which is public questions. So my question is, do we have any public questions? Don't believe we do.
Not received any, Andrew.
No, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I thought that was the case, but we have so many meetings going on at the moment, I can't quite get into my head which ones we have public questions for and which ones we don't. I think we've got another meeting after this, but we do have public questions. Right, thank you. So we don't have public questions on this one. So then that takes us then to our section 3. And what we've tried to do in section 3 is to bring together a Cheshire East Systems perspective into one place, and to make that viewable and public via this meeting. This is something we'd hope to develop, and with colleagues around the table's input, it would be helpful to continue to develop this section for the future meetings of this group, even though they will be limited in number. So if we can go then to section 3.1, which is the current context of the CCG in Cheshire and Merseyside, and Claire is going to launch this for us. And colleagues, I've not been very good at reminding people to introduce themselves, so Claire, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Claire Watson. I'm the Accountable Officer of the CCG. Could we put the slides up, please? As Andrew said, I'm going to launch this. I'm hoping somebody else is going to launch the presentation. Thank you, Emma. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So Andrew has outlined that this section is around Cheshire East. So the next agenda item is very much around Cheshire East Place, but obviously as Cheshire CCG, we are working on a number of sort of competing and challenging sort of geographies. So we are working as part of Cheshire and Merseyside Health and Care Partnership with our 8 CCG peer colleagues, as well as in the places. So as you'll all know, subject to the Health and Care Bill, the ICS, Cheshire and Merseyside Integrated Care System, will be established on the 1st of April next year. This will comprise of the ICB, the Integrated Care Board,
and the ICP. So with that, the 9 CCGs in Cheshire and Merseyside will be abolished, and their functions and people transferred to the ICB as the successor organisation for the 9 CCGs. We have to lead the close down of the CCG. So that's a big focus of work at the moment, close down and transition of staff and functions to the ICB, as well as supporting the development of the infrastructure and architecture at Cheshire and Merseyside and the 2 place-based partnerships in Cheshire. I think it goes without saying business as usual continues, and we are as busy as ever, and I know partners and colleagues are too. Next slide, please. So as part of the ICB establishment, there's a roadmap, and CCGs are asked and expected to operate differently from the end of Q3, so by the end of December this year. So in response to that, Cheshire CCG governing body and the membership have agreed to establish 2 CCG place-based committees to undertake decisions on behalf of the CCG at place. And today's meeting is the first of those. We have one in Cheshire West Place at the beginning of December. So the CCG and our 8 peers are in the process of deciding whether to delegate additional responsibility and decision-making authority to Cheshire and Merseyside Joint Committee of CCGs. So we're looking at place-based decision-making and Cheshire and Merseyside decision-making. All CCG and borough-specific work will remain within the individual CC decision-making fora. So for us, Cheshire Governing Body or Cheshire East Place-based Committee, decisions of and areas of work which span more than one CCG will be delegated to the Joint Committee. While we're a statutory body and we remain a statutory organisation up to and including the end of March, decisions will be taken at both those 2 levels, but we are looking at making more decisions at Cheshire and Merseyside throughout Q4. Next slide, please. This diagram actually is quite helpful. It's been used across Cheshire and Merseyside to illustrate the sort of tipping point of sort of increased delegation and responsibilities at an ICB level, and the close down and the send of the CCG as we send responsibilities, functions and staff to the ICB. Sort of talked about a docking, so responsibilities will be docked into Cheshire and Merseyside as those functions transfer into the ICB. But obviously you can see in Q4 there are a number of functions that remain within Cheshire CCG, primarily the close down work, general medical services, audit remuneration and local arrangements within place. And next slide, please. This demonstrates better and easy to understand. So this will be the governance for Cheshire CCG from December, subject to agreement today at this committee and an extraordinary governing body meeting later for Cheshire CCG. You can see there are statutory committees that stay within Cheshire CCG, remuneration, governance and audit, and the primary care commissioning committee, because you can't double delegate responsibilities around primary care commissioning. But you can see on my screen to the right of the CCG is the Cheshire and Merseyside Joint Committee, and we're looking to have subcommittees of quality, performance, finance and resources that will report into that joint committee from December. Thank you. This does look complicated, but I think it probably should if you think about Cheshire and Merseyside as a prospective organisation with covering 2.5 million people with a budget of over £7 billion. This is the emerging governance. Obviously from April, this will be different. From April, we will have the Integrated Care Board and the Integrated Partnership Board, Integrated Care Partnership. But in terms of that transition, you can see the governance there. I'm not going to go through it, but you've got the assurance, you've got the programme oversight and the transition, and you've got a lot of programme delivery with a number of groups, task and finish groups that report up through that governance. That will give governing body and the population assurance that safe transition is taking place. Thank you. So in terms of Cheshire CCG place committees, we saw this as a really positive and inclusive step forward. in decision making at place. We hope it accelerates the work underway in agreeing place-based arrangements from April, but it isn't replacing those. And what we want to do is meet every month. The next proposed meeting for every other month, apologies. The next meeting we're proposing is on the 20th of January. We'll continue if it's worthwhile, but I think it's important to note the world is moving incredibly quickly. So it is likely that things will change at Cheshire and Merseyside level, which may impact on different governance arrangements locally as well as at Cheshire and Merseyside. Next slide, please. So we want to be clear that the place-based committee isn't a joint committee. Its authority only covers CCG functions and accountabilities. So thank you for attending today. Your membership, you have the same voting rights as CCG governing body members. So in fact, we're acting today as a CCG. You'll be asked for your views, but you won't be asked to make decisions on behalf of your organisations. We want to have more discussions from your organisations, so it'd be really good if you could bring agenda items to this committee. And it's what we're looking to do is use this as a consultative committee as part of future planning. So I'll leave it there, Andrew, in terms of context for why we're here today. And obviously the context is as much about where we are within Cheshire and Merseyside as much as where we are in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Are there any questions or comments, observations regarding that context as to why we're here, what we are doing, and the wider picture for Cheshire and Merseyside? Okay, I'm not getting any little yellow hands, so I'll take that as that there aren't. We are simply asked to note that piece was for information. So thank you for your attention on that. I will move forward to section 3.2, which is Cheshire East Place update. First, we have Stephen Michaels, who's an independent chair of our partnership board in Cheshire East, who's going to give us an update on that. And we're going to move then to the Cheshire East ICP. And I'm hoping that Denise Fredschum has managed to join us to take that piece as Dr. Cairns can't be with us. So can I hand it to you, please, Stephen, for the first part?
Thank you, Andrew. It's just I'm going to try and relay this as a little bit of a story, really. As Andrew said, I'm independent chair of Cheshire East Partnership and its board. My background is a long-standing CEO in the health system, so I was say independent. I certainly wasn't. I was chief executive of a foundation trust for over 10 years, and more latterly have been a non-exec in different roles. So I'm quite independent and not from your part of the world. I'm from West Yorkshire. I was reflecting ahead of the meeting, and I think what I would say was there's a few stepping stones here. There was good progress made in terms of trying to develop a coherent offer of health and social care within Cheshire East as part of a more regional response up to 2020. Most of that was guided strategically by former reviews, most notably the Cheshire Review, and I think that led to the formation of the partnership board. But I think in 2020 there was a growing recognition within place of the need for a refreshed strategy, and basically through the work that was being undertaken originally in Mid Cheshire Hospitals Foundation Trust, they felt that through their chief exec James Sumner that there was a strategic offer into the place more widely that would probably fit the requirements of place based on a clearer understanding of population need. So what that strategy does is to set out a vision based on a segmentation of the population within Cheshire East. There's 10 segments which boil down to 4 clusters of need. And I think for most of the parties who were involved in the partnership board discussions and some of the discussions we had at the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think people felt that it possessed a certain utility that could be taken forward as the basis for a strategy for the next, possibly for the next 5 years and beyond. And with that in mind, we formed a series of lock-in sessions that brought together the chief officers and some of the clinical leads within Cheshire East. So that was Lorraine O'Donnell as Chief Executive Council, Claire as Accountable Officer of the CCG, John Wilbram, James Sumner, and Sheena Kaminsky. And then as Sheena moved into a different role in the ICS, there were different representatives from CWP. From a GP perspective, those lock-in sessions involved Dr. Paddy Cairns, Dr. Dave Holden, and Andrew himself. And I think we felt that they both created a much clearer sense of vision for Cheshire East and what could be done, and also presented quite an exciting prospect about what service transformation would bring, not only improvements to experience of care and addressing health inequalities, but would also address some of the long-term financial challenges that existed in the patch through a revision of the service offer. Where that took us from, I'm going to take us into where I think this fits with the decision-making part of the discussion. What was described as a number of gateways, and the first gateway was to get people to accept that that description of the population was something that would help us move forward on in terms of a strategy and a methodology to enact change. We have broad agreement around that, but back to the formalities, and I think this is where it comes to the statutory powers of different groups. We haven't got full sign-off, so we need that, in effect, to go through different bodies and organisations. And I'll be guided, I guess, Andrew, Claire, that would include possibly the CCG function. That is that version of how we see the population and how we see the strategy moving forward acceptable. It's very difficult when you're going through this period of change and you haven't got this formal CCG function longer term to know where we place that. I'll come on to some of that shortly. The second bit was some work that's already underway, which is to define the capabilities which underpin that work, and that's some work that James Sumner's leading on. And that will develop ultimately an integrated business plan for place and a long-term financial model. That will dovetail with some of the work that Denise and I have discussed this as we've kind of been through this process at some length, but it will build on the work of the ICP, no doubt, in Cheshire East. But it is work that needs to be developing. And as a result of that, what I think that will do is to develop another gateway, which is what has been described as a strategic staircase. It basically plots out key changes over a 5-year period. And what they represent are key decision points from a governance point of view. And I think that's going to be key, because when those decision points come in, and if they're around major transformations, so everybody's aware, it's in the public domain, that might include a rebuild of Leighton Hospital at some point, then those are major decisions for place and will have to be considered at the appropriate time through appropriate statutory measures. So at the moment, I think what would be fair to say is to ensure that that strategy is given a decent governance underpinning. We're exploring different legal forms, so discussions around joint committee, discussions around place committee. I think the ambition is to move to a joint committee, but also recognising at the same time that there needs to be wider points of reference, building on the really good work that we've been doing in the partnership board. So at the moment, that's work in train, trying to clarify how that works. Similarly, that work has to be led somewhere, and we're not sure what place leadership looks like at the moment. And again, we're exploring different models as guided by the ICS. Ultimately, all of this is going to have the acceptance and approval of the ICS at different points as the strategy develops. And I think that links back to a discussion we had last week, which is effectively what this will be is an earned autonomy model. That place, powers of decision making will be devolved into place as the ICS begins to understand how deliverable that strategy is and the degree to which the people working within Cheshire East Place are capable of delivering that plan. And I think that really takes us to where we are now. That's why this committee feels really, really important, just to receive that type of information as this journey begins the next few years of delivering that refresh strategy for Cheshire East.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dean. I will open up in a second to comments and questions, but I think you sort of asked to myself and Claire about the CCG governance around the strategy. Yeah. I think it would be entirely appropriate. Let's see what Claire's view is, but for that to be coming to this committee, this would be the appropriate committee, I think, to consider that on behalf of the CCG.
No, absolutely agree, Andrew. We're having similar conversations, as you'll know, over in Cheshire West in terms of development of place over there, but I think this is the right forum for the CCG governing body, and I think, you know, as you've said, Stephen, and others have said, in terms of the wider discussions and decision making in public. So I think I'd welcome that at the January meeting.
Are there any other comments or observations on Stephen's perspective on place?
Just a comment from, I guess just to add, Andrew, I think what might be helpful is coming into the January meeting is to provide a more detailed account, or a little bit of a kind of a background to how the plans developed, with some of the detail within it as well.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah. So, Councillor Corcoran, I've got your hand up. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, to say I agree with what Stephen has said, and thank you for inviting local authority representatives onto this body. I particularly like the phrase earned autonomy. I think that sums it up very nicely, and we need to earn that autonomy over the next few months.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it is certainly the ambition of place isn't to have as much autonomy as we possibly can have in that regard. Claire, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say, I think Cheshire East Place is in a really positive place. Is in a really positive position. You know, with partners working exceptionally well together. We've had, as Stephen said, a number of quite intense lock-ins over the summer months of the executive officers. But I think it's testament to everybody in Cheshire East Place that things are working so well. I think there's a real respect and understanding of each other's priorities and risks, and I think it's about how we find solutions together. You know, the system pressures of health and care and wider public sector challenges, no one organisation can manage those and solve those on their own. And I think that's where Cheshire East Place comes into its own, really, in terms of understanding each other's priorities, objectives, and helping to solve those collectively. And I think that you know, the work that's been done to date is positive, and I think the ambition is right for the population, because ultimately this isn't about committee structures and organisations, and we've talked about it in the place exec about organisation agnostic. This is on behalf of the population of Cheshire East. So I think you know, we are in a really good position. We're in a good place to move on in the coming weeks and months, and I think the more we can do together to get that earned autonomy from April the 1st and beyond from the ICB, I think is the right thing to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. One thing that struck me as we've been talking is that we've done all the work. Thank you particularly for Stephen for bringing us together and those execs to do that scoping work about the possibilities and that sort of concept of a strategy that we could all coalesce around. And it'd be great to bring it to the January meeting, so I think we'll do that. But the principles of co-production are something that comes to mind, and how we make sure that is embedded. You know, we've had those scoping sort of discussions. If we're thinking Gunning-esque in our approach, we need to think how we start this to be developed and co-produced with the population before we go too much further. So that's something perhaps we should all be considering. Are there any other thoughts, perspectives, or thoughts on that? If not, we'll move forward to the next item. No? Okay, so I'll pass over in a second to Denise. And Denise, would you please, as you start, introduce yourself? And it might be helpful just to say a couple of lines about what an ICP is, because we've got ICP update, but of course it's an acronym. And what is it? So before you actually start off, that's okay. So Denise, please.
Okay, morning everyone. My name is Denise Fredschum. My official title is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Mid Cheshire Hospitals. So I'm employed by Mid Cheshire Hospitals. Over the last 5 years, I've focused my time on reshaping the community services for South Cheshire and Vale Royal. But more recently, over the last year, I've taken on a sort of a managing director service redesign programme for the ICP. The ICP originally was set up as an integrated care partnership. I think as we move forward into the new world, it will partly become more of a provider group of people actually delivering the change on the ground from what is decided at place. And I think it's fair to say over the last 12 months, whilst there has been this emerging redesign and governance around place and ICS, etc., on the ground in the providers, we have done a lot of work in just getting on with changing services and putting ourselves in a very strong position, like Claire and Andy have said, that we are looked at in a favourable way, and hopefully that will help us to get more devolved autonomy as we move forward from next April. I could talk wax lyrical to you for hours on the work that we're involved in and the work that we're doing both as an ICP, which spans all of our providers. So it includes our council colleagues, mental health, voluntary sector, the acute providers and the community services providers. And it actually enables us to work together to make change on the ground for the people that we are looking after. We are focusing this year on the development of the care community, and the care community are the geographical areas across place that we've aligned our populations to. So we've got Crewe and Nantwich and Smash, which is Sandbach, Middlewich, Allsage, that rural element. And then we've got a number obviously in the east side of the patch, which we class as Chalk, Chaw, Knutsford, Macclesfield, etc. So we're geographically aligning our services to deliver services closer to home to the community and making sure that we can bring all those providers together so that we deliver those seamless services as we move forward into the place model of work. Clearly for us as a place, and Mid Cheshire and our community services, we also have a third of our population into the west as well. So that does complicate things a little bit, but we are getting good relationships across both east and west places now to make sure that we work cohesively together to make sure that that population gets equitable services. I think just look at some examples of what we've been doing over the last year, which I'm sure you're all interested in. As an ICP, we've got a number of transformation programmes, one of which is the children's services. So we're looking at a redesign of how we deliver children's services across our places, and that has enabled us to set up 2 children's hubs, one in Macclesfield and one in Crewe, which we know is a key focus of area of work, and that's had huge success so far. So instead of those small children having to go to hospital for blood tests, they're now delivered in the community. We've got an MDT set up between East Cheshire Trust and the GPs to support children who are continually frequent flyers to the practices to get more specialist help and support. We've set up jaundice clinics, we've set up fretful baby clinics, and the feedback on that is really positive. We're also do programmes in different parts as test of pilot, and we've got a cure project being set up through Mid Cheshire and the community services in South and Vale Royal, and we've seen a 50% reduction in smokers of admitted patients coming into Mid Cheshire Hospital since that's been working over a year. So we're starting to get into the prevention programme as well as the delivery of service programme. We've got a whole host of work that we've been doing on vaccinations, and I think one of the things we need to look at going forward is recognising that the COVID vaccination programme wasn't just a number 1 and a number 2 jab. This is here forever, and I think we're starting to look at, well, what does the future delivery model for the vaccination programme look like? And we've worked with Claire and Neil, etc. I think the final thing just to say, obviously because there's a lot on the agenda, as we've been working really well with the commissioners as well, and whilst this is the first meeting of the joint committee, there's lots of evidence where we've been working with the project managers in both the council, Sam through Nicola, and also through some of the project managers in the CCG, John Grant particularly, helped us with the Ageing Well programme, and that's a good amount of money, 3 million come into Cheshire to help us do the rapid response for patients at home. And one of the key really exciting parts of that is working with NWAS. It looks like we're going to be able to access the NWAS stack, which is their waiting list of visits, so that we can pick up the lower priority patients who perhaps had falls or frail, etc., and have called an ambulance. We're going to be able to give a rapid response to those patients to try and take some pressure off NWAS to get to the more priority patients, but also to stop that automatic transfer to hospitals. So that's a real exciting programme that we're working on together. But clearly some of the packages of care that we work on with the councils, we're looking how we integrate them so we don't go to the same patient's house twice, and also how, if we can recruit better with one group of people, we recruit together to get a more robust offer going forward. So that is a very quick snapshot of what we're doing, but it is really positive, and all of your support is really helpful, and we've certainly been really lucky in getting that kind of funding into Cheshire to help us to deliver that. So well done to all of you, and thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Great to hear about things changing positively on the ground and the coordinated work, which is all really great stuff to hear. So I'll open up for any questions, comments, clarifications for Denise on behalf of the ICP. Claire?
So firstly, thank you, Denise. I think you can tell by the speed and enthusiasm in your voice in terms of the passion within the ICP. I mean, I think, unfortunately, we may need to change the name of the ICP in terms of confusion with Cheshire and Merseyside ICP, but we can always say we got there first in Cheshire, can't we? But I think you're right in terms of the development of place, which is sort of, I guess, the focus of this discussion really. The ICP will probably morph into a sort of place-based collaborative. Yeah. Within the white paper, there are developments around to provider collaboratives across Cheshire and Merseyside, looking at integration on a horizontal basis, but very much the focus and the priority work that Denise and others have led in Cheshire East is about the vertical. No, so hang on. Yes, the vertical integration. I've got my horizontals and verticals right. Integration between providers across health and care system, and I think fantastic progress has been made. And I think increasingly with as Andrew said, we've got apologies this morning from Paddy, but the GP collaborative will increasingly play a bigger role, more coordinated role in that, to ensure there's a single voice for general practice as part of that provider collaborative, which is really positive. I think going forward, it's really important that we continue to work in that integrated planning way. And I know, Denise, you've mentioned something about vaccine programme. All of this work going forward into place, we need to sort of, review how it's gone and how we want to work in the future. But I think, the relationships are there to make sure that we do the right thing for the population. So, but really just, Denise, a massive thank you to you and the team for everything you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have any more hands, so that sounds like a great way to finish that item, with thanks to Denise. Thank you. And let's move on, which is to item 3.3. This is about the Cheshire East care tokens and how we spend them. And Linda is down to lead it, but I know that you're presenting this jointly with Alex Thomas, so that you're not presenting it.
No.
I'll shut up. Pass on to you.
Yeah.
Linda.
Just me. Alex has contributed, but he's been unable to stay for the meeting. So thank you. So initially, thank you to him for some of his information. I have a PowerPoint, which I believe Emma is going to pop up. So, good morning. This morning we've got a few slides just to go with the high-level report in the papers. It's an update around the financial work stream and to give a little context in terms of the monies in the system. So this is just the commissioner budgets. The provider foundation trust budgets are a subsection of that. And also just to say that we're in the middle of a huge change. I mean, obviously Claire has gone through that previously, but it is a massive change in terms of the financial framework and the financial flows around the system, and how the money gets to place, and I don't think we can underestimate that. So just to be aware of that as we go through, and this is just, you know, hopefully this is the beginning of a start of a journey around us understanding and being, you know, really transparent about all of the resources in place, providers and commissioners together. So first I'm going to do backgrounds, what we've done so far, and a bit of financial context for the place of where we are at the moment, although recognising that will change, and then what we're going to do next. So I can have the next slide, please. So I think Claire's gone through this, a lot of this. One NHS commissioner, 2 local authorities, 4 providers, many, I haven't put on there, but many GPs, many voluntary sector organisations as well. But these are the ones that are most involved in terms of getting the financial governance structures in place. So the CCG, the interesting thing about our CCG is we cover 2 places. And in Cheshire and Merseyside, we are the only CCG that does. And one of the things that we've got to do is to identify expenditure at place so that we can sort of have budgets next year actually based on some sort of reality. So we have been asked to also develop a financial framework to support integration at place. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? So we've established a financial framework group for Cheshire, which includes the 2 local authorities, the CCG and all of the providers. And we've sought to understand, because all of the organisations operate under different financial frameworks. Basically, we get our monies in different ways, our governance structures are different. So we've looked to understand how we all work together. We've tried to develop a timeline for reporting, but obviously we are a bit hampered by national changes to budgets, etc. But we have tried to do that, and you're going to see the first attempts today in terms of 2 separate place reporting of the CCG budgets. So we've had to develop a methodology around that, which has been through the CCG Finance Committee and the financial framework, so everybody's aware of how we are splitting the budgets down to a place. So we've done that indicatively. Next slide, please. So financial context. So we have tried to estimate the CCG's position for the first 6 months of the year split to pace. So we need to note, however, the allocations we are using are pre-merger and pre-pandemic. We may have completely different allocations for 22-23. So this really is indicative, because the ICSs are going to be receiving the allocation, and it will no longer be done centrally to place. It will be done by the ICS to place. So it's going to be different, I think. Different expenditure. We have the pandemic. So we have a different levels of expenditure, types of expenditure. All our NHS contracts are on block, for instance, and things like that. So it is a different level of expenditure. Also, this reporting doesn't give you a flavour of the underlying deficit. Depending on the allocation, depending on the level of expenditure that continues going forward, it will give us a different underlying deficit. Or it might not give us an underlying deficit. We don't know. We might get loads of money and massively reduced expenditure. But before the pandemic started, we had a significant underlying deficit in the system. So I think we do need to be aware of that when we're looking at these figures. Can I have the next slide, please? So what was the answer? So in the first 6 months of the year for the CCG budgets, we spent 327 million. We received an allocation based on our previous allocations of about 323 million. And so there was a shortfall of 4 million. And this was funded across the Cheshire and Merseyside CCGs effectively, because we had a risk sharing agreement. We were working collaboratively together. So we redistributed the money to allow Cheshire CCG to get more money, and we got about £4 million, and all of that went into Cheshire East Place. So again, need to note that that doesn't necessarily reflect the actual position. or what's going to happen in the future. But we now have a robust method for actually identifying the current levels of expenditure going forward, so we will be able to produce place budgets. Can we have the next slide, please? So Cheshire East Local Authority. So this is Alex's slide. So I'm going to try and give you some information on it. He couldn't be with us today, but you can see the council has a net budget of £311 million annually, of which 60% is spent on health and social care. So that's the majority of it. The council has to maintain a balanced budget and is expecting to have in-year forecasts published at the end of the month. So unfortunately, our meeting was slightly a bit early to know exactly where the council is at the moment and to have their published data. Alex wanted me to mention specifically around the governance. The governance is different in the local authority into the NHS, and I think we have to be aware of that in terms of how we spend the money. Can I have the next slide, please? Our main structure for dealing with working together at the moment is something called a Section 75 agreement. It's an agreement which has been put in place and allows the local authority and the CCGs to work together. Our main Section 75 agreement we have at the moment is the Better Care Fund, and we work on this mainly around urgent care. It's got specific things in there like the Disabled Facilities Grant and the IBCF. But within there is no risk sharing, there's no risk or gain sharing, and the monies are kept separate. So it's less of a pooled budget, which is what Section 75 is supposed to be, and more of an aligned budget. And I think this is something we will need to look at going forward, of how we do this differently, how we expand it. We may need a different Section 75, so we need to consider that going forward. The next slide, please. So these are the key financial risks. There are loads of financial risks. Alex was very keen that we discuss the financial risks. So I've put 3 in here. Uncertainty of flows around the integrated care system. Absolutely. We have no idea really what the allocation will be next year. The level of allocation to place, how much of the money will be delegated to place for place to enact. How will we do that? I don't know. That's out for consultation at the moment. Obviously, we're developing the structures locally for that. And something really sort of more immediate, a bit less strategic, the impact of the discontinuation of the hospital discharge fund and how that is going to impact across the system, but particularly within Cheshire East Place. Next slide, please. So, next steps. Currently, we have a single financial framework across Cheshire. So the group works on all the budgets together, but are very aware that we have 2 different places and they are focusing on slightly differently, etc. So we're going to put together 2 financial groups, and the CCG will make sure that the numbers add up in the middle. So we're going to do that. And then we're looking at developing more understanding around the Section 75, looking at some principles so that we can all work together on that, risk and gain share support. And also, I think, to add to that, something we mentioned previously is what do we need to do across with the providers as well, to provide you with information around the provider finances within the system. So what do we need to do? So I think a bit more reporting, what do we need to do to inform this committee around sort of the provider issues as well as those within the commissioner side. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. And my apologies to you because I didn't remind you to introduce yourself. So I wonder whether you could do that now, and probably in his absence, introduce Alex as well.
So my name is Linda Risk and I am the Executive Director of Finance and Contracting for Cheshire CCG, and Alex Thompson is the Section 151 officer. So he is in charge of finances and resources at the Cheshire East Council.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on what's certainly from an NHS perspective a slightly obscure financial position by a lot of variables, but
yes, for all intents and purposes we had a balanced position for the first 6 months of the year. but it is obscured by all sorts of things.
Yeah. Peter and then Claire.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. My name is Peter Munday. I'm a lay member for governance on the governing body of the CCG and also on this committee. A question which you may wish to deflect, Linda, is what is people's commissioning? I think there was 128 million pounds attached to that item, and I just wondered what it was.
Oh, this is where I have to get the PowerPoint up. Was that on the local authority?
Yes, it was. Yes, of course. Yes.
Yes, I will deflect that. I think that's perhaps one of our colleagues, our local authority colleagues on the call will know, but I don't. I will deflect that, and perhaps
Helen has just put her hand up.
Helen is going to tell us. Excellent.
Helen, do you want to come in?
Hello, so I'm Helen Charles-Mayo. I'm the Exec Director for Adults and Health in the Council. So people commissioning is essentially all the money that the local authority spends on commissioning services for people in adult social care or children's social care. So what that means practically on the ground is the money it spends on residential and nursing care for older people, people with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, autism, children looked after in the children's side, mental health services. It includes domiciliary care, it includes money we spend on day services if we commission those rather than provide them ourselves. So it's, you know, the totality of what we spend on people's services.
Thank you, Helen. That's very helpful. I can see Peter is content with that. He's nodding. So good. Thank you. Claire, could I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thank you. I've already said who I am, so I'm Claire Watson, Accountable Officer for the CCG. So Linda, can I just see whether I've got my maths right, please? So the presentation we had from the CCG was half year. So if we add up the local authorities' annual budget for these services and Cheshire East full year effect, we're pushing sort of £1 billion, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at the net budget for the local authority at 311 and us the Cheshire East Place at 646. So.
Yeah, so it's pushing £1 billion. So so I think that's the opportunity, isn't it? That's the joint budget that we as Cheshire East Place partners have to spend on the population of Cheshire East in terms of health and care services. So that is an enormous amount of money. Recognise there are different governance routes and different accounting structures at the moment. But I think that is the opportunity and the challenge for the future for Cheshire East Place as we move forward. So I think, you know, we talk about, you know, Denise has updated on all the work on the place-based collaborative. You know, we'll talk about various sort of commissioning priorities, but that is almost the size of the prize, isn't it, in terms of that joint budget and how we collectively spend and allocate that for the population of Cheshire East. So I thought it was a really helpful update. Thank you, Linda, and thanks, Alex, for the figures and the sort of the risks and the governance there. But I think that's we have to sort of recognise that is the size of the prize in terms of how we best spend that allocation to improve, you know, the outcomes, reduce inequalities for the population of Cheshire East. And I think it's a fantastic, exciting opportunity, and we really need to get best value for that allocation. So I think that's a challenge to us all as we move forward to think about our strategy for Cheshire East Place, how we govern ourselves in a joint way. I think we just need to recognise that's the amount we have to spend, and there's an enormous, exciting opportunity there. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'll reflect, I think, on that, Claire, in terms of, I think you're absolutely right. So that's the size of the budget, and our job, responsibility, duty is to extract as much value and good for the population out of that money as we possibly can. And that's about us organising ourselves in a way where we can deliver, I think, on the plans that we either already have or are emerging, which is our place plan, which is centres a lot around wider determinants of health and population-based care, and the emerging strategy, which Stephen spoke about earlier, and then how we organise ourselves collectively to deliver on those things so that we can derive as much value for the population out of that money as possibly can be had. I think that's our clear responsibility, isn't it? I'm not getting any other hands going up, so with everyone's permission, Paula.
Hi, I'm Paula Webb. I'm the Director of Quality, Patient Experience and Safeguarding for Cheshire CCG. Thanks, Linda, for that helpful presentation. I guess it's not so much a question as more a comment, really. I was really heartened to see your points about Section 75 and really putting that time and thought into thinking about how we can use that to drive system change and to find the energy, really, to do that. You know, we've heard a lot today about the opportunities around the size of the budget, the emerging governance, the solid relationships that have been developed. I think that the Section 75 opens up some really exciting doors. So I was really heartened to see that feature on the slide deck. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I don't think Section 75s are things which are going away. They do seem to be, despite the proposed changes to legislation, from what we presently understand, of course, it's still subject to parliamentary consideration, but actually Section 75 will probably remain the legal basis of cooperation between health and local authorities for the future. So they are going to be something which continues to feature for us in place, I think, from the sounds of things. Thank you very much for everybody's comments. That's been very helpful. Thank you to Linda and Alex in particular for that. Let's move forward to, we're just asked to note that, so it's for information. Move forward to section 3.4, which is the sort of the flip side of the care tokens, which is what are we actually doing and what is being delivered. So this is the system's position on quality and performance, and is being presented by Neil Evans and Paula Webb. So can I hand over to whoever's speaking first, please?
I'll start and then pass over to Paul, if that's okay. So I'm Neil Evans. I'm Director of Planning and Delivery for Cheshire CCG. So just by way of background, the Quality Safeguarding Performance Assurance Group has recently slightly changed its standing, although the membership and agenda is the same. We were previously a subcommittee of the governing body, and we in quite some detail review the current information we have about the quality, safeguarding and performance of the services we commission. So that's the background to the meeting we're referring to, and you'll note that what we've brought is a high-level summary of what was discussed at our most recent meeting, which would have been our November meeting. We meet in the first week of each month to review a range of information. So within the paper, you'll note particularly we focused very much on the real challenges that we all recognise we're seeing at the moment in terms of access to services, and linked to that the workforce challenges we're seeing across a large number of our services in terms of recruitment and retention of staff, which are clearly contributing to some of that challenge in people accessing services. We had a particular focus around urgent and emergency care, and we talked about some of the current performance metrics and the plans that we've got for the coming winter, or the winter that we're probably now just about in, and we really focused there on some really challenging performance information in relation to ambulance access and turnaround at hospital, time people were spending in an A&E department, which we recognise has increased significantly since before the pandemic, but as I say, with a real focus on the winter plans and some of the mitigating actions which are being put in place across health and care partners. The other area that I'll just mention before asking Paula to pick out a few key points from her remit was around primary care. Many of you will have seen that at the end of October there was a national letter and guidance that came out in relation to improving access to general practice, and at the time, as Cheshire CCG, we developed a plan with colleagues from Cheshire Merseyside Integrated Care System, which focused on two things. One was about some additional national monies, which was £250 million nationally, which roughly breaks down to about £3 million for Cheshire as a whole, and how we would use that funding to increase access by increasing capacity. Clearly, that sounds very positive and is very positive. One of the challenges is still finding workforce that can add to that capacity in a fairly short period of time. So we have plans. We're still awaiting final sign-off of our plans, so we can actually press the button and get some people on the ground actually adding that capacity. So that was the first part of this request nationally that we acted on. The second part, which we have commenced with, was around some targeted support of practices who were struggling most with access. And in the national letter, anyone that's read it will know it focused on 20% of practices. The approach we've taken in Cheshire is to actually contact all our practices and offer access to support, whether that's more intensive in terms of diagnostic and process support, or whether that simply is about how can we help you to increase capacity over what is going to be inevitably a challenging winter period. So we're on with that second bit of work. The first one, I say, we're just waiting for final confirmation that we can start actually putting our schemes of additional capacity into place. So that there were a couple of the areas I would highlight. The final thing I'll just mention, and I know Louise is on the call. Health Watch sit on our group, and Health Watch presented some patient feedback around waiting times, and we discussed and explored the impact of that and some of the mitigations that are happening. But I think we all recognise it is incredibly challenging. Some of the urgent and emergency care pressures I touched on earlier clearly have a knock-on impact, that the resource that is supporting people in an emergency therefore aren't available to support people on a routine waiting list, and that means that some really good progress during the summer months in reducing waiting times are getting more challenged as we've got into the autumn, as we've seen those winter pressures start to really impact on demand for hospital-based services. But I'll stop at that point and let Paula pull out a few key points, and then happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. Paula Webb, Director of Quality Patient Experience and Safeguarding. So just a little bit more context really to remind folks that, you know, these few pages before you are a condensed version of the best part of a 100-page pack, which goes into enormous detail. I can see Gwydion nodding. He is a member of our former committee, now called a group, where we look at extensive detail. So this is just a summary really of the matters considered. And what I wanted to really make sure that we do pay attention to the fact that the breadth of this report does actually cover primary care, care homes, independent sector, as well as the trusts. And it is to be really clear actually that is about the provision across the system. And I think it's really important to think about the provision, about the system and about the interconnectivity. And the other point that I wanted to highlight was that not only does this just focus on providers, what this also does is give you a couple of areas where there have been national issues, for example, blood bottle shortages, requests for assurance on a particular medication in terms of valproate. So whilst many of the reports that we receive at the group focus on individual providers, it does also pay attention to the plethora of national guidance that we receive that really we use to help us guide best practice and to identify areas where we need to pay attention to quality and safety. And it's through this report, the detailed report that we take, that we provide the assurance to our governing body members. I wanted to point out probably a couple of things, which was around cervical screening and childhood immunisations. It's really just, you know, to highlight that there are delays across the system, across all of providers, and the energy and effort that has to go on providers to ensure that service areas that provide us with upstream health, such as cervical screening and immunisations, need to be restored to pre-pandemic levels. And I have to say the progress made in primary care has been outstanding. And the other area that I would highlight as well is there's a section there about healthcare-acquired infections, is to remind people that we are looking at a range of healthcare-acquired infections. It is not just COVID. You know, while we continue to treat people, we need to be mindful of the way we manage our antimicrobial resistance, And I'm in a really fortunate position in that I spend a lot of time working with both our directors of public health in Cheshire East and Cheshire West, and we work in partnership on antimicrobial stewardship. It's a really important matter that we need to pay plenty of attention to. I think they're probably the areas that I would pull out. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much for both of you for that. I'll open up to questions. Whilst people are finding their yellow hands, hopefully, I'll make the comment. I think picking up on something that Neil brought in, which was the health watch and work that has been done around waiting times. And I wonder whether I can set a challenge to our executive and content engagement colleagues. Perhaps we could have a patient story for January that focuses around that, a timely story, because I think January will be, that would be a good time to be hearing from that. Paula, do you want to come back?
I did. I just wanted to say that having written that section at 2.7, the members of our group and our committee were really keen that we made it clear that Healthwash had gathered a lot of feedback, and it wasn't just about people's physical well-being. A lot of the comments and feedbacks about the challenges that people experienced whilst they were waiting for care that was really impacting on emotional health and well-being. And we had some really powerful quotes actually in our group meeting. And so there was a real strength of feeling when people were asking us what to summarise to bring today from our group, that we must make that visible today. And it was not just about physical well-being. It is about the impact across people's lives in a wider sense.
Thank you. I think that's a good point. Perhaps it's much more wider than just a patient story, and perhaps we can have a conversation with Louise about how we shine a light on that work for our context for our perhaps the next meeting of this committee. I'll give Louise an opportunity to make a comment in a second. Julie Green.
Thank you. Just to thank both Neil and Paula for bringing this information in a summarised way, and also offer assurance to the wider membership that absolutely there's a lot of detail as a partner that I know that both Paul and Neil do go into, not least a quality schedule, which we are working on currently, so that assurance is there coming through up into those committees. So thank you for giving that overview and really just providing that additional assurance that the detail is really covered and scrutinised. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Louise, you may not wish to comment, but since we mentioned your report, I just want to pause and give you the opportunity to comment should you wish to.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I don't think I introduced myself either earlier. So Louise Barry, Chief Executive of Healthwatch Cheshire. Yeah, we know we have significant issues around waiting, and I think, it's been hit on the nail's been on the head there, that this is about people's whole lives that are impacted. It's impacting upon daily living. It's very much a consideration around people being able to function, act as family members, go to work, and the general toll this takes. There's a huge key issue about communication in here, and we are talking as Healthwatch across Cheshire and Merseyside with the Cheshire and Merseyside ICS around how communication can be improved so that people can get better access as to what's expected. So whilst we're really keen to get the waiting list down, we're also very, very keen to give people more accurate and perhaps better expectation of what the weights are going to be, because in turn we know that allows people to look at their wider lives and look at what else they can do. So to that end, I guess, Denise was talking about the ICP, and we're sat here as a joint group. This is not something that is purely about health. This is about our local authority partners, our third sector partners, about us looking in the wider context as to what it is in somebody's life that can be done to help with that time while they're waiting, and to ensure that there is support. So it's not an easy fix, this one, but it's something that it's really great to see that it's being taken on board, but I'd be really keen to see what the joint plans were for that as well. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Louise. And I think that's something that those of us who work in any health or care service are very aware of, and are seeing this on a daily, multiple times a day. the impacts of weights on people's lives. So yeah, it's extraordinarily important that we act on it. And I think your point about communication is something that comes up all of the time. People accept that there are problems and there is weight, but communication is really important. I've often wondered whether we should be sharing the prioritisation that is being used. So people are being prioritised for services, but we don't share that with the population. I think many people would be happier if they knew why they were in whichever stream they were in, and therefore how long they might need to wait. And it also gives them the opportunity to say, no, actually things have changed for me. I'm no longer, it doesn't look like me anymore. I've now moved up to 2 streams and you need to do something about it, please. Whereas at the moment people just don't know. They just don't know where they are in that queue, and so it's very, very difficult for people. And so I think your point about communication is extraordinarily important.
I would always support that, Andrew. I know there's some pushback on that, but I would always support that. And I think it's also important for us to know that it's not a blanket message, because different trusts and different areas, different, and you say the prioritisation, it's if people have information, they have some level of control or some level of input. So absolutely, I'd support that.
Thanks very much. We haven't got any further hands or comments on that, so thank you very much. Very important to know what's happening with our quality and performance, so thank you. It's very important. We're asked simply to note again, it's for information. Moves us on to our next section of this meeting, which is section 4, which is the item for CCG business, and we do have 1 paper of information, but then we have 2 decision papers as well for this section. So if we can start off please with 4.1, which is the Accountable Officers Report. So Claire, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, so this paper's for information, but hopefully it covers a number of issues that partners will be interested in. I won't go through the paper in absolute detail. I'll just pick out some key points. So whenever I talk about COVID and the COVID programme, I always thank partners for everyone's work to support the population and to support the CCG in this work. So as we know, the COVID pandemic continues. Infection rates in Cheshire East have effectively doubled between September and mid-October, but since then the rates have fallen somewhat. Cheshire East has taken action to focus on areas where there are high rates, and that has included surge testing and targeted vaccination programmes, but we can't be complacent. As of the 3rd of November, nearly 300,000 eligible patients over the age of 12 registered with a GP practice have received their first dose. That's nearly 84%, and 79% have received their second dose. Clearly, we need to continue with the Evergreen Offer campaign and encourage people who've had their first to have their second. We know that surge testing and testing will take place during the winter months, and thank you to the Council for organising that. The booster programme, so this is the 3rd dose. The booster programme started nationally on the 15th of September, and that's being managed across the Cheshire footprint. So we have 14 primary care-led vaccination sites, 18 community pharmacy sites, and that's supported by our roving and pop-up model. During September and October, the focus of that booster programme was on care homes and housebound patients. So we'll aim to have all of our care homes visited by the 5th of December. We do have a couple of homes that have outbreaks, so that might delay that a little bit, and all housebound patients will be vaccinated by the 19th of December. One of the key focuses is on the over 80s being vaccinated with their boosters, and this is a sort of a high risk issue across the Northwest, but I'm pleased to be able to tell you that 84.5%, 84.5% of Cheshire East over 80s who are eligible have been vaccinated with their booster vaccination to date. That's really positive, and in total 71.2% of eligible population in Cheshire East have received their booster vaccination. I think that it's been a huge success, the vaccination programme across Cheshire, and both local authorities always figure in the top 2 performing local authorities in Cheshire and Merseyside, and very, very highly in the Northwest. So that's a massive effort on behalf of the population, but thank you to everyone involved. There's an update on the long COVID programme You'll see that with the CCG supported funding in their September meeting, and I think it's important to note that we have gone at risk to extend that funding until March 23 to ensure that we can recruit posts to that service. So that's being run through the 3 providers across Cheshire, and Cheshire East and Mid Cheshire services started on the 1st of November. So that obviously is the local service. There's still the sort of tertiary sort of high-end service at Liverpool, but what we want is that local service based around our local populations. We're really pleased to have developed and signed the MOU with the local authority around hospital discharge. So we now have a joint service commissioned through the local authority with a brokerage service to support discharge from hospital. And I think that's a really good model that we look to extend. Obviously, our CHC nurses support where the packages are particularly complex and their clinical input is required. So this is a really positive move, and it's funded as one of our Better Care Fund priorities. Neil's already updated on primary care access, so I won't say any more on that, but just thank you to our practices. I think it was late recognition from the government that actually general practice does need additional support and funding over the winter. And thank you to Neil and colleagues across the CCG area, obviously with our GPs and the ICP and LMC who've worked on those proposals. The CCG is leading work across Cheshire and Merseyside on IAPT, improving access to psychological therapies to improve the performance of that service. So since launching, we've got additional trainees who've been deployed across the places, a new clinical supervision hub, which is being managed by CWP, Cheshire Rural Partnership, and it's having a really positive impact. And you can see at the bottom of 5.2, referrals have increased by, treatment has increased and we've got improved access. What I want to just finish with is section 8. So this evening, Cheshire CCG's Communications and Engagement team, on behalf of Cheshire partners, will be attending the Health Service Journal Award. We've been shortlisted for NHS Communications Initiative of the Year, spreading the vaccine, not the virus. Make sure I get that the right way around. It's a brilliant campaign that we've coordinated with our partners. So fingers crossed that we are successful tonight. And even if we don't come home with the award, I think it's recognition of all the excellent partnership work we've done together. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Claire. We have a question from Gwydion.
Thanks, Andy. Gwydion Rees, Deputy Chair. Thanks, Claire. Really detailed report. And I was just hoping to get a bit of clarity on a specific question around the COVID vaccination. It might not be for yourself. The COVID vaccination programme has been excellent, but I think there are probably learning opportunities here, because I quickly looked at the care homes, and it looks as though 18% of the care homes across Cheshire missed the target to vaccinate them by the end of October. They are probably amongst our most vulnerable patients and the ones that we want to vaccinate first. And I know the teams worked extremely hard, but I think in light of system working, we should probably look at examples like that and ask, was there in hindsight, and hindsight's a beautiful thing, an opportunity actually to shift resource and say, well, okay, we're vaccinating all these people who are lower risk, but we're not actually getting to these really high risk people as quickly as we possibly can. So it's just something maybe that all of us can feed in on differently. It might not be a question for now, but it does worry me that you've got that 18% of people who are high risk and should have been vaccinated first. They're also clustered in individual homes, which again increases the risk. Thanks.
Yes, I agree, Gwydion. I think you're right. I mean, the focus has been in the main on housebound and care homes. I think we know this phase of the vaccine programme is considerably more complex. I think I've said many times in the last couple of weeks, when we first started, it wasn't easy, but there was quite a good sequencing of cohort 1, cohort 2, cohort 3. As you can see from the paper, we have a number of different providers in terms of our vaccination centres, our community pharmacies, the roving model. We also have hospital hubs vaccinating frontline health and care workers. as part of this sort of booster programme. So we've had to commission a number of different providers to cover some of these care homes this time, because of some of these sort of decisions in terms of opt-out of our primary care network. So we're working on that. Take the point, and I think it's something that we will look at going forward, but we are providing assurance that these will be done as soon as possible. And I think the providers are working with us and being very flexible to try and get, they're the last dates we're looking at, Gwydion, I can assure you. And you can imagine that we are pushing as hard as possible to get these homes and the housebound vaccinated as soon as possible. But yeah, I think that's something we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Are there any further questions on Claire's report, please? I don't believe there are, Claire. So thank you very much for your report. And we'll have to note it, so it's for information. Moves us on to section 4.2, which is the Cheshire East SEND strategy, which this is a paper for approval. So I know we've discussed this before, but a reminder that we will be, if we approve this, we'll be approving it on behalf of the CCG, even though that decision making will be added to my colleagues who wouldn't ordinarily be sitting around the CCG table. But it would be only on behalf of the CCG. So I believe that Joe, Dave and Mark are going to present this. So can I hand over, please, to, I'm guessing, Joe, because she's first and she's appeared on screen. So Joe.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Yes, so I'm Joe Vita. I work within the Strong Start programme, and I'm joined by my colleagues Dave Ledbetter and Mark Bailey from Cheshire East Council. So they will add into discussion and any questions that need to be answered. So thank you for having us here today and for receiving the paper to present the draft, the Cheshire East Special Educational Needs and Disability SEND strategy. So this is a strategy that builds on the existing strategy following the SEND inspection that took place back in May. And whilst we know it was a positive inspection, we've obviously taken the opportunity to build on the areas that were identified at the outcome of the re-inspection to further strengthen our plans to support children and young people with special educational needs. A key part of that is to improve the communications, which is why the strategy is coming forward and has been through a formal and an informal consultation process. So the strategy was considered and discussed at the Children and Families Committee last week on the 8th of November and was supported. So we're asking the CCG to note the consultation and engagement that's taken place to develop the revised strategy and to approve it on behalf of Cheshire CCG. If anybody has any questions, so I'm happy to take questions. Dave and Mark are equally here to respond to any points for clarification or questions.
Thank you very much, Joe. Whilst people are having the opportunity to think and put their hands up, I'll just comment that it was a delight to read in terms of the engagement approach and the co-production that has gone on for this work. And it's almost a blueprint that we could be using for an awful lot of other service developments. So congratulations to all involved on that. I enjoyed reading the work that's gone on to get to the strategy, and of course the highlighting the improvement that we've had locally from the 2018 position that we had. So that's all pleasing to read. So any questions or comments from colleagues? Councillor Favell and then Councillor Corcoran.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Andrew. Really pleased to recommend this to the committee today. It's a marvellous work, but it's easy reading, it's clear, it's very comprehensive. But most of all, it really does go a long way to sort of strategise what we really need to do in SEND. We know we had a poor inspection a few years ago, and I've obviously been seeing firsthand the amount of work that's gone into making the improvements that have already been made. The inspection we had in May was only focused on the two areas within the SEND, which was the timeliness of reports and also the autism strategy. Those two have now been sort of signed off as being, sufficient progress. And in fact, I think one word was used, was transformed in certain cases. So that was such a brilliant thing to hear. However, there is still a lot of work to do, and there are still many parents that have been let down in the past by the system that we've had. So I'm really pleased to see that we're addressing all of those points and really listening to parents about what they want. Communication is certainly one of the priorities, and a lot of parents are not getting the information they need soon enough. So I think this is going to be a fantastic strategy to see that we, improve services, but it's not just about what we're doing, it's about the end user experience, and that really is what we should be focusing on, is what what it's like for the parents and what it's like for the children. So yeah, it's a great strategy, and I just like to thank everyone, not just for the work putting into to draft the strategy, but all the work that's gone on in the SEND team to make these improvements and make the lives of our children and families better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. Is there any? Do you want to respond to that? Or Dave,
yeah. Well, just to acknowledge that, as Councillor Flavel has said, there has been a huge amount of work done since the initial inspection back in 2018, and the revisit was very positive. But there is still work to do, and we do, as a partnership, continue to have a focus on those areas to support families, so that there is, continue to work on improved timeliness and access to services, which we know is a challenge. And obviously, in light of the COVID pandemic, has presented, more challenge across all of our services. So as a partnership, I think, we continue to work really closely. I think that was a real strength of both inspections, actually, that we have got some really good joined up working across the authority and the CCG and our health providers and education. So yeah, I agree that there's more work to do, but yeah, we've made some good progress. So
thank you. Councillor Corcoran, could I bring you in, please?
Yes, I think I'm reinforcing some of the points that have already been made, but just to clarify, Ofsted has 4 categories of outstanding, good, requires improvement, inadequate. And Councillor Fell mentioned back in April 2013, the children's services were rated as inadequate. We've been on an improvement journey since then, so we were rated requires improvement at the latest full inspection, but we're definitely on an improvement journey. We've had a couple of focused visits which have been more positive, but until we are actually have a full inspection, we are still technically requires improvement. And hopefully, fingers crossed, at the next full inspection, we can move out of that. And also, to pick up on what Dr. Wilson said, the points, it's in paragraph 2.1, to say thank you to all the people who've assisted in writing this report. On the final point, I would say thank you to David Ledbetter. I was very pleased to see him come on the call. So if there are any detailed questions, he's your man. And thank you to David.
Thank you very much, Sam. Are there any further comments or questions on that item? No. Okay. So we have this is a paper for approval. So we're asked to note the consultation and engagement that has occurred into developing the SEND strategy and the associated action plan, and we're asked to approve the draft Cheshire East Special Educational Needs and Disability Strategy 2021 to 24. And I'm going to look to see whether we are in agreement to do that, in particular if there's anybody who votes we shouldn't be in agreement to do that. Okay, thank you. So on behalf of the committee and therefore on behalf of the CCG for Cheshire East, we have agreed to that. And once again, thank all of those that's been involved in the work, and let's continue that work so that we do get that full inspection, which we're all ambitious to have, which will be outstanding. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That moves us on to section 4. No, it doesn't. Moves us on to section, yes, it is 4.3. This is the item that I am, a number of colleagues are conflicted on. We would ordinarily pass over chairmanship to the vice chair, who's Councillor Corcoran. Corcoran also declared a conflict on this item, in that his wife is a local GP, and those of us who are GPs clearly we are conflicted because we are GPs. And so I'm going to hand over to Peter Monday to take over chairmanship of this part, and Peter will tell us his decision on what he wishes those of us that were conflicted to do, and what party we should or should not partake in the item. So Peter, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. Yeah, conflicts of interest noted. And my approach is as follows. This is what I'm proposing anyway, that you know, clearly any of the people conflicted won't take part in any vote. But it would be, I think, ridiculous to exclude anybody from the meeting, given that you can come back as members of the public. But in any case, I wouldn't want to lose your valuable insight into the service and clinical issues. So, with the agreement of everybody else, you know, if you're able to answer any of my questions or questions from another member, that may be helpful. May not be necessary, but it may be helpful. First of all, this item is mirrored by a similar conversation which is going to be going on in Cheshire West, and there is some suggestion in the paper that we may be setting a precedent for Cheshire West. My view on this is that this shouldn't really influence our discussions or decision, but you know, I've you know, that people may have other views on that. What I'm going to ask now is, if Neil, can you just speak to the paper and just bring out some main points, you know, bearing in mind we're sort of bang on our finish time. So if you'd like to just bring out any main points, then I'll come back with any clarifications I want, and then we can open it up.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, just to apologise first that Tanya, who's the expert and the author of the paper, is on leave, so she's delegated upwards to me to present the paper. Just in terms of some background, because I appreciate this appears probably slightly unusual in that it's a relatively small sum of money describing 1.5 whole-time equivalent staff. Peter's alluded to the reason that this has come here, which is there's a much larger parallel service that runs in Cheshire West, which is much more material. So we're presenting the Cheshire East paper today and the Cheshire West equivalent in a couple of weeks' time. So broadly, to describe what the 1.5 people do and the issue we're trying to resolve today, the 1.5 people fall into a category of employees called social prescribing link workers, who offer non-medical support, guidance and signposting to members of the public following referral from their GP practice. Now, historically, there's been a lot of work done around developing this model of care, and those who've read up on it will probably know that there's an estimate that about 20% of GP appointments relate to social care or social issues rather than medical issues, hence why this kind of role has increasingly developed. And there's clear evidence to show that this does have positive outcomes, and there's a number of indicators used in services to look at patient well-being or a person's well-being and how that improves as a result of going into these services. So it is an evidence-based service, and the assessment of both this and the other service that in Cheshire West deems that they are delivering a good quality service to the public. The issue that we've faced is the funding source for these services, in that historically the way the services were funded was out of a national allocation of money, which was originally called the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund, that goes back to David Cameron, was the Prime Minister at the time, which was around improving access to general practice. And over time that model has morphed further back towards being a more traditional GP type led model of providing access to services outside of core general practice hours. And from October next year, the intention is that the funding for extended access services or improved access services is transferred from the core CCG budgets into primary care network budgets, effectively meaning for this service the current funding source is no longer available because it will be moved into a different funding stream, which is the primary care networks. To add some complexity to this, primary care networks have a additional funding source, which is called the Additional Roles Reimbursement Service, which is designed to increase capacity in general practice. through non-GP roles, such as additional physiotherapists, additional social prescribing link workers, which are clearly the roles we're describing here. But one of the technical bits, which is that my point around the technical reason for having this challenge, is that what CCGs have to do is maintain any services that relate to the additional roles reimbursement service roles. You can't just get rid of them and then transfer the funding into the primary care network and say you have to fund it from there. And that's the technical part of this. The NHS England's advice is we have to maintain these services whilst at the same time the primary care networks can employ additional staff over and above. So that's the broad background to what this paper is getting at, and I appreciate it does feel slightly technical from an accounting and a budgetary sense. In terms of the actual model in South Cheshire, the South Cheshire part of Cheshire East, then it is 1.5 whole-time equivalents. They're employed through the GP Federation of South Cheshire and Vale Royal, but through a subcontracted arrangement called Alternative Solutions, which is run by Pathways Community Interest Company. So not directly employed by the GP practices in this case. However, the primary care networks will be going forward employing additional social prescribing link workers using this separate additional roles budget. So I guess the ask that we've come today to the committee is to confirm approval to maintain this 1.5 whole-time equivalent service in South Cheshire at a cost of £53,000, which clearly creates a pressure on our future budgets because there will be no core budget available to continue to fund this because it will have been moved into the primary care network from October next year. So that's a brief, probably slightly confusing overview of the paper, which goes back to the point this is a technical guidance issue rather than whether it's a good service or not discussion. So I'm happy to take any questions and try and clarify any confusion I may have created.
Thank you very much, Neil. Somehow you've covered all my questions off, but has anybody else got any more questions for Neil on this? Councillor Corcoran.
Yes, I won't be voting on this because of the declaration of interest, but I do have a question. I've looked into compassionate communities, which seems similar to this. So it's an area of interest to me. How is the impact of these workers measured or monitored? And so what evidence are we getting that they are having the effect that we would want them to?
Yeah, at a simplistic level, because I'm not a technical expert in the evaluation, we use patient activation measures and something called ONS4 measures, which measure people's well-being and mood as a result of the support and advice they are given. But it might be helpful to have a more detailed technical discussion with someone from the service in terms of how that measures through. And also, I think your point around other alternatives is a really key one as we increasingly integrate, because we recognise I'm talking about duplication of funding streams or loss of funding streams here, but we recognise there's a large number of roles performing quite similar functions, and from a public point of view, how we streamline and make that simple and understand which services are available to support people, I think is vital, because there's a danger that if we have too many that we cause confusion and actually people don't know where they can get the right support. But the evidence shows that this does deliver both locally and nationally in terms of improving people's outcomes. But I think it's a recognised and valid point that how do we make sure everything fits together neatly.
Thank you. Dr. Rees.
Thanks, Neil. You've really started to touch on what I think is the most important issue. So I think there's lots of evidence out there that the link workers and various additional roles add value and are really important and start to provide the upstream care that we really need. I think I'm just viewing it from a more practical point of view and making sure that we have a consistent offer which is well integrated, because my concern with a number of these roles is the way that they're actually procured and contracted, and therefore the control we have over them. So if we do start to collect user feedback, how do we improve the service? and I'm always concerned when they are independent or bolted on loosely to our existing community services. So it's trying to think really, well, who's going to ensure that we are getting good value from these workers, especially if we have all these little bundles, because historically that's been the big problem in health and social care. And I was very much hoping that we would move much towards a more sort of seamless, integrated provision. And you'll know much more about that than I do, but that's the thing that I think is the crux of this question for me.
Thank you, Dr. Rees. It's perhaps discussion for another day. I don't know, but in terms of this, this is effectively a marginal decision on 1.5 whole-time equivalents. But I think I'm sure people are going to want to come back to this topic, and perhaps a hint for your paper for Cheshire West, Neil. I think we'd like to see some more metrics in there, but that's. Has anybody got any other comments? This point in time, Louise.
I'm just wondering how, in addition to that, these roles sort of feed into the care community information that we hold at that level as well. So there's something about that joined up working, isn't there, and where we're getting to, and it not being pockets of work. Gwydion, I take your point, and bolt-ons, because I think that's very difficult and potentially very dangerous for the individuals that are trying to access services and navigate. But if that perhaps sat within care communities, there's some wraparound of support that's there should something change. I'm not quite sure exactly what I mean by that, Peter, but there's something for me that's just kind of a piece of the jigsaw that perhaps isn't there.
Can I just come back, Peter? Because
quickly, because I don't want to be responsible for an overrun. So.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, clearly, assuming that we move to approving this, then we can certainly have the conversation with the overarching provider, which is the South Cheshire and Vale Royal GP Alliance, around how we ensure that this service is fully integrated and what model works best, because they are clearly a core part of the care communities in terms of their member practices. So the decision we're taking here really is about not decommissioning the service. I think that doesn't, negate our opportunity to develop and improve and ensure integrated going forward.
Thank you very much. I mean, just a suggestion that maybe this can go on a topic for a future meeting, but it seems there's quite a lot of interest in it. But thinking, so going back to this, this decision here, it sounds to me as if anything other than option 1, which is what we're being asked to approve, would be a backward step. Option 3 seems to be a bit of a leap in the dark, and obviously we're interested at this point in time in continuity. I just, in terms of how we normally vote, particularly for our local authority colleagues, we don't normally go around the room. Well, we normally try and achieve a consensus. So all I was going to ask was that is there anybody that doesn't approve of option 1 at this point in time? Louise, you still have your hand up. Is that no? That's come down. So I don't think we've got anybody disapproving, and obviously we can note the rest of the instructions in the recommendation that they're just for noting. So I think we can probably take this this proposal as approved. Thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Dr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Peter, and early as well, on time. I've got to fill now. So thank you very much for chairing that item. Right, thank you very much. That takes us to section 5, which is our last item, which is any other business. I don't believe that any other business has been notified in advance, but I will give the opportunity of anybody to raise one now. Okay, not seeing any hands, so it just leaves me to close the meeting then. So thank you for your attention and for your contributions, and to getting us through our first meeting of this type. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in January. And please remember, input into the agenda and shaping the agenda to make this a truly place feel to do it, I think would be very, very helpful. So please do put your thinking hats to that and contribute to the agenda with your thoughts and items. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you all in January.
Thank you.